still there. But tonight we crown a national champion with Michigan or Washington.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see, the juxtaposition of two styles tonight. I think tomorrow morning will be really interesting with where is Jim Harbaugh working. I say tomorrow morning, but that's more figurative. Like this could be his last night at Michigan, regardless of what happens. So could be going out with a bang or not. How does Michael Penix look against maybe the best defense he's played all year? How does the Michigan defense look against probably the best offense they played all year? Does Washington, do what they've done in almost every single game and lead and look comfortable and then decide to,
play with their food?
Yeah, drive over the line, I guess, when it, close their eyes and hope for the best at the end of the game. I don't know. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's national championship night, so long road to get here, and two great teams here at the end of the road. And I think that with Michigan, there's plenty of storylines. You mentioned Jim Harbaugh. You mentioned just their road to get to this point. They're going to feel like they have, their backs against the wall and against the entire world. In some cases, that's how they've had to kind of have that mindset because of all that was brewing around them off the field. But to get there to the very end and then to possibly hoist the trophy would be the biggest FU back to everybody else out there who called them cheaters and this and that into Ohio State and the media and all of that. And for Washington, I think it would be a great capper to a terrific season. And it's that for Michigan as well. It's just that Washington had this other underlying storyline that was also ongoing. They've just kind of gone about their business playing football without those off-the-field distractions. But both are great teams. Both have superstars that are fun to watch and that we'll be seeing on the next level. And it's just a matter of tonight of whose stars shine brighter and which team overall plays the best. But I think it's a very interesting matchup with Washington's passing game and Michigan having a very stout defense. And flip-flop that, is Blake Corum going to be able to run all over the Washington defense like it appeared Texas was going to be able to do at least early on before they kind of got away from that. So, yeah, I love the chess match that we have in front of us. I think everybody analytically or otherwise has an idea of how they think this game will go, but we really don't know till they kick it off. So very excited and also bittersweet because it's the last college football game that we're going to see for quite some time, and it will be the real true off season, although that won't be slow news-wise by any means, but we do still love watching the games, and the fact that tonight's going to be the last hurrah is a little bit bittersweet, but that will lead into the craziness of the offseason. But, I think it's a great matchup, and I'm looking forward to it.
Washington will play the last game of the Pac-12 tonight, just like Texas played their last game in the Big 12 a week ago when they lost that game to, of course, the Huskies in the Sugar Bowl. Keys to the game, and I think this, and Dave Softy Mahler from KJR will join us in about 35 or 40 minutes. Angelique Shengelis covers Michigan, will join us in about 15 or 20 minutes. They're both in Houston for tonight's game between Washington and Michigan. So let's see, if we had a box to check, who would you give the advantage to, either one of you, and then you don't have to get too outwardly with it, but just kind of, you can answer it. Who is most likely to win the battle, or is it a split? Michigan's defensive line against Joe Moore award-winning Washington's offensive line.
I'm giving early edges to Washington across the board when it comes to a lot of these things. Michigan wins in the kind of old school fashion, more often than not. But just my question for Michigan, and because there's only at full strength, and this is all full strength, there's only about 4 teams in the country that have the combination of receiver, quarterback kind of threats that Washington does. And Washington's already beaten 2 of them, and 2 of them are Georgia and Florida State and weren't in the playoff. But they've already beaten Oregon and Texas. But Michigan hasn't played those teams yet. So that's where I think it goes in, and the Washington offensive line doesn't get talked about nearly enough because, they're just, that's what you do. But
they protected the hell out of Penix against Texas. Now, they couldn't run the ball that well. They ran well enough.
And they haven't really done that all year. But as far as a pass-blocking offensive line goes, there's no better in the country.
I think if there's any advantage, it's kind of splitting hairs. I don't think it's going to be an overwhelming advantage of you clearly get this point and you don't get any point whatsoever. I think it's not going to be like 1-0 Washington's offensive line versus Michigan's defensive line. I could see where it's like a 0.75 to a 0.25, if that makes sense. Yeah. But I do give the edge to Washington's offensive line based on what we've seen up until this point, and I was very impressed by how they were able to fend off Texas's ultra-talented defenders up front, and just overall, Michael Penix's ability, even when he was feeling pressure, to escape that and to still be able to make plays, I think gives you a double whammy. It's like even if you are able to get free or get some room to get after him, he then has the ability, it's almost like a second level that you have to conquer to be able to just get the sack, right, or to get to him. So I give Washington, I guess, an advantage, I guess you would say, but that's where you start in this game in my mind, and I think that's going to be one of the most fun things to watch tonight is how well that Joe Moore award-winning offensive line holds up against a very feisty and nasty Michigan defense.
Yeah, that Michigan defense got all in the business of Jalen Milroe, but even then, at the end of the game, there was a chance for that game to go, of course, into overtime. So then how about the Washington wide receivers who we both know, all of us, three of us know, are very talented, against Michigan, and they've got themselves some stars that will be playing at the next level in the secondary.
Yeah, Michigan's secondary is fantastic. I really like Mike Sanistrell quite a bit. He's a tough player, kind of that old school, Rod Woodson type punch in the gut corner as well to go on with his athleticism, and that's really Michigan's whole defense. But, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk are absolutely a nightmare for everybody because it's a situation like, what do you do? Like, what do you try to take away? In the Bill Belichick school of thinking of defense, at his best, and he still even does this, he knows he takes away your safety outlet, right? That's where he messes with quarterbacks. He'll go and say, okay, if he doesn't complete passes to this guy on third down, then it's going to be fine. So if Michigan takes that tact, which guy is that? I mean, Rome Odunze is the one that they go to in the crunch moments and makes ridiculous things happen. But because all those guys are so good, what do you take away and hope for the best? It's really, and it's proven a near impossible decision for anybody this year because nobody's beaten Washington.
Yeah, I'll give the slight advantage again to Washington's wide receivers. I just think that they're so deep and so filled with playmakers. It's just hard to imagine a scenario, even with as good as Michigan's secondary is, to where they're just going to completely shut that down because as we saw against Texas, and Texas did not have as good of a secondary, clearly, as Michigan. But even when they did have great coverage, it didn't matter in some cases. So this more or less boils down to me to more of Washington's wide receivers and Michael Penix, making them have the advantage over Washington's secondary, if that makes sense.
Michigan's secondary,
because he places it in the right spot that no matter what kind of coverage you have, they still are able to convert it. That Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, McMillan, etc., are able to make the plays on the ball as opposed to, drops and things like that. So I think that's going to be more of the factor of just compared to Michigan playing a certain type of way is can Washington make that perfect throw in tight coverage? Can they make the catch in tight coverage like they were able to do against Texas on multiple occasions and like they've done throughout the year? And if they're able to do that, then Michigan can have as great of a secondary as they want, but it's still going to be a situation where Washington's going to make a play. So to what level are they able to continue on that path is what's really I'm looking at, and I think that I'm going to give the edge to Washington in that regard because, again, they've been doing that all year long.
If you're going to give a slight edge to Washington's offensive line against Michigan's front, then that has a hell of a lot to do with what you could do with your wide receivers compared to Michigan's secondary, loaded up with a lot of talent that they have. And then, of course, there's Michigan with Corum and what Edwards and what they do to run the football because they basically just take your will. And Washington, as Craig, you mentioned earlier, they had some gaping holes that it appeared as if Sarkisian would have just kept running the football. One, they keep Washington off the field. I know that game was a week ago, but I don't know what the average yards per carry. I'm going to say at least 6 or 7, maybe on occasion it was 8 or 9 yards per carry, sometimes 10 or 12. But if they can run the ball the way Texas was able to run the ball, even without Jonathan Brooks, to me, that's how you keep Washington off the field, and that's how you give Washington a few nightmares on what they do on defense.
There was opportunities there, not only running it, but also in the passing game to the running backs. I mean, there was, Baxter with that big catch from the sideline late in that game that was on that final drive that kept them going. And so I think there's some potential there through the air with the running backs. But, yeah, I mean, the run game was something that Texas looked like they were going to be able to lean on and really utilize early on, and then got away from it for a couple of different reasons. But I think that's obviously Michigan's bread and butter, and they're not going to say, oh, we're getting into the passing game here.
No, I mean,
they're going to try and run it down Washington's throat, and I think they're going to be able to have some success doing that, because I don't think Washington's going to shut that down, just like they didn't shut that down against Texas. So, yeah, that is where I do see a favorable matchup for Michigan. Now, Washington's got some really good players on defense, and I think that they're going to make Michigan have to work for it, of course. But I do think that Michigan will be able to run the football pretty effectively, and to what degree, I think will be one of the top 2 to 3 storylines in this football game, absolutely, because if you turn it into where J.J. McCarthy's suddenly having to go in a shootout ball, well, I'll give Washington the edge in that type of a game 10 times out of 10. So, yeah, Michigan's going to want to play their style of football to the best of their ability, and that will be running the rock with Blake Corum and the rest of that cast. So, yeah, that's a big one, and I do give Michigan the edge there. I think they're going to be able to run the football.
Both teams have field goal kickers that seem to be very reliable. Washington ended up kicking a lot of field goals in that game against Texas, and in some cases I thought it would come back to haunt them, because the field goals are usually not going to beat a team that scores like UT.
Well, Texas, when Steve Sarkisian, he scripts out the plays longer than almost any coach in football. I mean, he likes to, most coaches script out like the first drive, maybe 2 drives. He likes to go really deep. And
did I hear the number 40?
Yeah, he'll script it out to maybe 40 plays.
I heard somebody, and I don't remember who it was, said that last week, that he had gone above and beyond his typical. It was some Texas podcast that he had scripted like 40 or something plays right out of the gates, which was odd, but that's what he did, in that last game.
I always wonder, so you recover a fumble at your opponent's 5 on the kick return, and your first play is a deep ball down the middle, and you're at the 5-yard line. Do you kind of offset that?
You do.
Might switch around
Sometimes you do, but I do think that maybe last week what got him, because he did have his deeper script, that he was like, well, I'm not going to go off it yet. And it's not like Washington was running away with the game either, to make you think at a point like, well, I need to change this, because the things that were happening were not things that were really necessarily a problem with the script. It was things that, would be unscripted anyway. So, but I do think that maybe got him in that, he was like, okay, we're going to do this. And then when you're behind in the second half, also, the natural reaction is to not run the ball as much. Mm-hmm. And they were at times where they really wouldn't behoove them to do it because of the time. But yeah, they probably should have leaned into it harder. And the thing that Washington will have to deal with is, at no point, like you guys said, is Michigan going to go, well, this wasn't the plan. I mean, their plan is always to run the ball.
You would think that this comes down. Michigan runs the ball, they probably win, even though Washington can score a lot of points. If they can put up 150 to 200 yards rushing, which is a lot, and that's not giving Washington defense enough credit, but they did give up some gaping yardage to Texas, and I saw that against Oregon and a few other teams too. So that'll be fun to kind of watch.
Yeah, I think special teams, after what we saw from Michigan last time around, that got very dicey for them and nearly cost them against Alabama. So special teams, I think, is often overlooked, but in this case, especially what we got to see here recently, that's something that you really focus in on with Michigan and say, okay, they've got to clean that up. They had problems on punts. They had problems on field goals. They had problems with the extra points. So if they don't get that right, then that's where you could see, missed field goal suddenly turns into an avalanche of like, oh, dear God, because then Washington scores quick. And then, and that's
down
the thing
10, not just 4 or whatever.
Now you're trying to run the football. How much time's left? What's the clock look like? Those types of things. So, we don't really have a great feel until we get into this game of how it's going to start off. But, Michigan's going to run the football and get to Michael Penix, and Washington's going to want to hit big plays with their wide receivers and try to get something out of that run game, of course, but then also stop the run on their side of things as well. So it's going to be a great game, in my opinion. Last year, you kind of went into it and you weren't really positive of how TCU would hold up against Georgia, and obviously we saw pretty quickly how that went after about a quarter. But I think tonight we should be in for a much more tantalizing type of national championship matchup to close out the year.
If they're any as good as either one of the endings, the drama in the semifinals, my goodness, we're all going to not be able to sleep tonight. One way or the other, we'd be like this. We'd be wired like we had a bunch of caffeine right before we try to go to bed.
And I know it's not saying much compared to last year's game when it was about a quarter before everybody was like, all right, this one's pretty much over. But I just think in general we're in for a really fun night, and it's going to be a very deserving champion, although I know with Michigan there will always be that segment that, put an asterisk or whatever. Been plenty of those articles written, but you go out and win the games in front of you, and they've been doing that up until this point. Both teams have, and so I'm excited to see who gets their final win and gets that national championship, and then who takes their first loss of the year.
I have one